Chapter 1, Default Judgment. I didn't even know I was being sued until the judge called my name. It started with a text from my former landlord. "Hey, random, but did you get served or something? Got some court-looking mail at the old place." I assumed it was a mistake. Or a scam. I hadn't lived there in nearly a year. But something about the timing and the pit in my stomach made me go anyway. That's how I ended up sitting in the back of Department 36, surrounded by a sea of cheap suits, cracked heels, and legal pads. No lawyer. No paperwork. No clue why I was there. I figured I'd ask the clerk after the session. But then the judge said my name. Out loud. Clearly. As if this courtroom had been waiting for me all along. "Ms. Caldwell, are you present?" I stood confused. I'm not sure why I'm listed." The bailiff looked at a clipboard. Phase Frame Consulting, docket 39492F. That meant nothing to me. The judge narrowed her eyes. "This is your final opportunity to respond before we move to default judgment. Are you denying the charges?" "What charges?" A murmur swept through the room. The clerk handed me a printout. Invoices, contract terms, a formal complaint. $8,240 owed to a vendor for back-end systems and dev support. Signed under my name. My address. My federal tax ID. Filed under a business I didn't know existed. I could barely breathe. "That's not me. I didn't sign any of this." Then a voice behind me said, calm and crisp, "Yes, you did." I turned around. There he was. Troy, wearing a gray blazer and a courtroom grin. I hadn't seen him in a year. Not since he ghosted after our so-called collab. I never thought I'd see him again. And I definitely didn't expect him to be standing in a courtroom, pretending to be the one who'd been wronged. Chapter 2, The Face in the Back Row. He didn't look nervous. He looked like he'd been waiting for me to figure it out. I didn't see him right away. Not when I first stepped into the courtroom, not when the judge called my name, not even as I tried to make sense of the stack of paperwork someone handed me without explanation. I was too busy trying to breathe. My name had been printed on legal documents I'd never seen before, attached to a business I'd never registered, and tied to an address I hadn't lived at in 11 months. The walls felt too close. The fluorescent lighting buzzed like it was trying to short out my thoughts. That's when I turned around. And there he was. Back row. Far left. Sitting like this was entertainment, not a civil suit. Leg crossed. Elbow propped over the bench behind him like he was watching a rerun of a movie he'd already seen. He looked well-rested. Polished. The same worn leather messenger bag slung beside him like an accessory. Troy. He didn't smirk. He didn't blink. He didn't need to. That calm look on his face? It told me everything. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a coincidence. He'd been waiting for me to catch up. I turned back toward the bench, trying to force the thoughts out of my head, trying to hear what the judge was saying. But everything felt like static. Phase Frame Consulting. Breach of contract. $8,240 owed. I could barely follow the words. My voice sounded tinny when I finally spoke. "I've never signed anything from this company. I don't even know what Phase Frame is." "You can file a motion to contest," the judge said, flipping through her stack. "But we are past initial response deadlines. Plaintiff is entitled to proceed unless service is proven defective." I looked down at the copy of the complaint again. Everything looked so official. The EIN, the business name, the date-stamped contracts, all of it pointing to me. My identity. My data. My damn signature. Someone had stitched a life together using pieces of mine. And Troy was sitting in the back row, watching like it was art. When the judge called for recess, I didn't wait. I turned on my heel and walked straight to the gallery. He stood before I even got there, as if he'd been waiting for his cue. "Troy. Elle," he said smoothly, like we were old co-workers running into each other at a coffee shop. "You look great. What the hell is this?" I asked, heat rising in my chest. "Why are you here?" "Support," he said innocently, then let the word hang. "Just making sure justice is served." "You filed this," I snapped. He blinked, like I was being dramatic. "Technically, I filed the supporting documentation. The vendor's the one who brought the claim. And you're the one who created the fake company." "Fake?" He tilted his head. "That's a strong accusation. You forged my name, my information. You're the one who set this up." He took a slow breath, then stepped in slightly. Not enough to violate space, just enough that I could see the amusement behind his eyes. "You handed it to me," he said softly. "Logins. Emails. Business registration templates. Remember that weekend we worked on your site? You went to sleep. I didn't." I stared at him. I didn't know what was worse, that he admitted it, or that he was daring me to do something about it. You think no one's going to figure this out? Troy smiled. One of those slow, infuriating smiles that make you want to scream in public. Then figure it out, he said. File your little motion. Hire a lawyer. Chase paper. By the time you do, I'll be 3 bank accounts ahead. He slung his bag over his shoulder and started down the stairs toward the courthouse doors, whistling low under his breath. I stood there, still clutching the legal file like it was made of glass. Everyone else saw a mild civil case. But I knew what I was looking at. This wasn't about money. It was about control. And I just walked into a story he'd already written the first act of, using my name as the title. Chapter 3. Not just a mistake. Looking back, I didn't hand him my trust. I let him wear it like a spare jacket, just until it fit. Troy wasn't always this polished. When I first met him, he was working 2 freelance IT contracts, living out of a co-living space downtown, and using a cracked Android with a battery pack duct taped to the back. We met at a branding seminar. One of those free events you only attend for the cheap wine and the chance to network with people equally desperate to make something real out of thin air. He introduced himself as a systems consultant. Said he helped small businesses clean their digital hygiene. I laughed at the phrase. He smiled like he'd invented it just to make me laugh. That first night, we talked about imposter syndrome, bad Wi-Fi, failed domains, and why we hated LinkedIn. I left with his number, a few notes scribbled on a napkin, and the strange feeling that I'd finally met someone who got it. He started showing up. Not in a clingy way, just present. Helpful. Always with a solution. My email wasn't syncing with my new CRM? He fixed it. I couldn't get my invoice automation to run cleanly? He rewrote the script. When I mentioned I was filing for an LLC, he offered to walk me through the paperwork. Done it a dozen times, he said casually, like it was no big deal. I never questioned it. I was exhausted. Juggling too much. Learning everything on the fly. It felt like a miracle, having someone who didn't just want to talk about building something, but could actually build it with you. And it didn't hurt that he was charming. In a quiet way. He didn't flirt. He admired. Subtle compliments. Small insights. Like he was tuning into a frequency most people didn't hear. He never asked for access. That's the part that gets me now. He didn't have to. One night, I handed him my laptop without thinking. I was cooking dinner, and he said he could optimize a few things while I stirred the pasta. I remember laughing, said something dumb like, "Just don't steal my identity." He grinned. What would I even do with it? I laughed too. God, if only I'd known. It wasn't until I started backtracking after the courtroom that I remembered just how many little things I let slide. He helped me register for digital banking. Said his friend had a referral link. I never checked the terms. He set up my domain and parked it temporarily under his dev account so it would be easier to manage. He offered to host my business email on his server until mine was stable. He walked me through business templates, some of which he drafted himself. I always assumed he was just being generous. But generosity has a shelf life. And his ran out the moment I stopped needing him. I still don't know exactly when he started copying things, or when he registered Faye's frame under my credentials. But I know this. He wasn't improvising. He'd done this before. And I wasn't the first person to mistake his brilliance for kindness. Chapter 4. I start to disappear. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow deletion. And I was the one being backspaced. The first sign was small. So small I almost ignored it. A payment failed on one of my client platforms. Just a renewal, nothing urgent. I figured it was the bank. Or a glitch. The kind of error that gets resolved with a 20-minute hold and a scripted apology. But the next morning, my card declined at the grocery store. And when I opened my banking app, my account was locked. Suspicious activity detected. Please call support. I froze. 3 hours, 2 verification attempts, and 1 increasingly tense phone call later, I found out my information had triggered a fraud flag. Not because of one charge, but because someone had tried to open 3 new credit lines under my name. 2 were denied. 1 wasn't. That's when the real unraveling started. I checked my business email, or tried to. Access denied. Password reset requested. I checked the domain tied to my business. Gone. Re-registered. Still in my name, but pointing to a blank placeholder page that looked vaguely professional and said nothing at all. I opened my tax filing portal. Already submitted. I hadn't even started. My stomach turned cold. Within 48 hours, I learned the full scope. My LLC had been rebranded. Someone updated the name, the email, the address. A second apartment had been leased in my name, in another part of the city. New utility bills. A digital mailbox. A Shopify store registered to my stolen EIN. Even my health insurance flagged suspicious enrollment activity. It was like someone had taken a blueprint of me and started rebuilding it without me inside. And no matter where I turned, the paper trail led right back to me. The worst part? It all looked real. All the metadata. All the signatures. All the emails. My digital fingerprints were everywhere because they were copied, borrowed, repurposed. And the systems weren't built to question authenticity. Just consistency. The name matched. The credentials matched. So the fraud passed. Troy hadn't just taken what I gave him. He duplicated me. And now the courts, the banks, the clients, even the IRS, were dealing with two versions of me. And I was losing. Every time I tried to explain, I sounded unstable. Every time I raised my voice, I looked defensive. And every time I said the truth out loud, I think someone I used to know stole my identity and built a company out of it to trap me in a lawsuit I didn't know existed. People stared at me like I was delusional. But I wasn't crazy. I was disappearing. And he was using my silence to write over the parts of me that hadn't vanished yet. Chapter 5. I confront him. You don't plan a confrontation like this. You rehearse it. You try to. But in the moment, all you really want is for them to flinch. I found him at a place I never expected, but somehow wasn't surprised by. A polished co-working lounge downtown. The kind with leather chairs, free espresso, and wall quotes about disruption printed in sleek, backlit Helvetica. He was posted at a corner table with a MacBook open and a second monitor mounted beside it. All very official, very legit startup energy. He looked like he belonged there. And maybe that was the worst part. I stood at the edge of the common area for a full minute before walking over. Watching him, he didn't notice me at first. He was too busy toggling between windows, a spreadsheet on one, an email thread on another, and something that looked like a pitch deck open in preview mode. I thought of all the nights I stayed up building my business from scratch. The hours I spent obsessing over invoices, fine-tuning workflows, networking, failing, recovering. All of it real, all of it mine. And now here he was, coasting on the identity he carved out of my shadow. I walked up without saying his name. He looked up and didn't flinch. Didn't even act surprised. Elle, he said smoothly. To what do I owe the honor? I sat down across from him without asking. Cut the performance. I'm not here to make conversation. His smile didn't move. That's a shame. You always had a great presence. You stole from me, I said. His brow lifted slightly. You're going to have to be more specific. Don't play dumb. You know what you did? You filed for a company using my credentials, forged contracts in my name, rerouted my EIN, hijacked my site, and registered bank accounts under my digital ID. That's a lot of words, he said calmly. For someone who voluntarily gave me access to every tool I used. You exploited trust. I used opportunity. He leaned back. You left doors open. I walked through them. Not my fault you didn't change the locks. None of this will hold up, I said. I've already started filing motions. I'm working with legal counsel. He nodded, almost impressed. Well done. No one's going to believe your version. They already do, he said. That's the thing about proof. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be early. I filed first. I showed them records. I gave them a story. Now you're the one playing catch-up. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. What do you want, Troy? He shrugged. Nothing you can give me anymore. But you know what I did want? Credit. Control. Something of my own. And watching you build something out of thin air while I handed you half the back end made me realize I didn't need to compete. I just needed to take the mirror. You're insane. No, he said, folding his laptop shut. I'm just finished pretending I'm not smarter than the people who left me behind. He stood. Good luck proving what you know, Elle. I'm sure you'll find someone who listens eventually. Or maybe not. He gave a polite nod, the kind you'd give to a stranger after a decent meeting. Then he walked out, calm, slow, like he wasn't holding a stolen life in his back pocket. I sat there, staring at the empty chair he left behind. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't raise a hand. He didn't have to. He knew the systems better than I did, and he was betting I'd never catch up. He was wrong. Chapter 6. Lawyers don't listen. There's nothing more infuriating than explaining your own erasure to someone who hears it like background noise. The first 3 firms didn't even call back. The 4th sent me a chatbot. By the time I reached the 5th, I was practically begging the receptionist to let me speak to a human being who could understand what I was trying to say. Not in sound bites or simplified bullets, but as a person whose life had been quietly stolen and repackaged under her own name. Eventually, I got a meeting. A virtuelle consultation. Prepaid. 30 minutes. The attorney's name was Devin, and he had the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to question the legitimacy of his own identity. Everything about him felt templated. Smile. Donne. Framed credentials in the background, perfectly lit bookshelf. His Zoom face was flawless. I started from the beginning. Not just the company name or the lawsuit, but the setup, the trust, the laptop access, the domain transfers, the EIN reroute, the fake contracts with my signature, the confrontation with Troy. I told him about the bank account I never opened, the business registration I never filed, the website I never built, all under my name. I laid it out plainly, calmly. But somewhere around minute 9, I realized he'd stopped actually listening. He wasn't absorbing the horror of it. He was sorting it, like a support ticket. When I finally stopped, he nodded with the faintest flicker of a practiced frown. That's quite a situation. I didn't respond. He leaned back in his chair, hands steepled like he was about to explain why I couldn't return a purchase after 30 days. The challenge here, he said carefully, is you're describing a pattern of fraud without direct evidence that links it to this individual. I blinked. Did you miss the part where I told you he admitted it to me in person? And did you record that conversation? No. Any witnesses? We were in a co-working space. He gave a small, sympathetic wince. Unfortunately, verbal acknowledgement, even implied, won't hold up unless it's documented, especially if the business filings appear valid, which, from what you've told me, they do. They're forged. But were they filed using your personal information? Your actual EIN? Your real address? Yes, I snapped. Then, he said softly, the burden shifts to you. You'll need to prove lack of consent. And without a signed statement, written confession, or a paper trail explicitly linking him to the actions, not just your suspicion, it's an uphill battle. I wanted to throw something. Instead, I asked, so what do I do? Devin's voice turned transactional again. If you uncover anything more concrete, metadata, time-stamped screenshots, email threads, anything showing he operated under your identity without your knowledge, we can revisit. Until then, I wouldn't advise engaging in active litigation. You risk validating his claims by responding too early. Too early. That phrase landed like a slap. I didn't realize until then how naively I'd expected someone, anyone, to take this seriously. To see what I saw. To hear what Troy had done and say, yes, that's enough. Let's fight this. But instead, I was being told to wait. To let him keep running. To stay quiet until the damage got worse. I closed the laptop without saying goodbye. Sat in the dark for a while. And then, for the first time in weeks, I pulled out my backup drive. The one I hadn't touched since Troy helped me streamline my systems. The one I thought was obsolete. The one he probably assumed I'd forgotten. He was wrong. I didn't have a lawyer who believed me yet. But I had something better. A trail. And if there was one thing Troy couldn't resist, it was leaving behind a digital signature. Chapter 7. The hard drive he forgot. He thought he erased everything. But he forgot what I saved before I trusted him. The backup drive was buried under my bed. Stuffed into an old file box wedged behind a pair of boots and a tangle of expired charger cords. I hadn't touched it since before the move, back when my living room doubled as my workspace and Troy still dropped by like he had keys to my life. I plugged it in with low expectations. Mostly curiosity. Part desperation. The folders loaded slowly. The kind of lag that makes you question whether the thing's even working. But then there it was. A folder labeled DV_temp_backup. I didn't remember naming it. And when I clicked inside, I stopped breathing. Recordings. Screenshots. Auto-saved files from a shared folder Troy helped me clean up when we were still collaborating. I opened the first screen recording. At first it looked ordinary, him toggling between tabs, adjusting DNS settings. But then he opened a template contract and manually swapped out my original LLC name for one I'd never seen before. Phase Frame Consulting. He filled in my tax ID. My signature block. He exported it to PDF. There was no hesitation. Another recording showed a dashboard with my name logged into a business banking platform. Only I wasn't the one typing. You could see his cursor, his tabs, his bookmarks. All his. And then I found the smoking gun. A paused email in his Gmail draft folder, still open during the recording, with the line, "Use this EIN, she won't notice. Registered to Elle Caldwell, but I'm handling the back end." Time-stamped. Dated. It was him. It was always him. He hadn't just taken my identity, he'd documented it. I sat there frozen, then moved fast. I recorded everything, scrolling through folders, file names, file properties, timestamps. I copied it all to a fresh encrypted drive, then uploaded a backup to a secure cloud folder I'd set up years ago for client archives. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't even know what my next move was going to be. But I had something that couldn't be erased. Proof. Real, traceable, time-stamped evidence, showing exactly how he built a company from the stolen scraps of my life. He thought I'd forgotten this drive. He thought I'd forgotten how to protect myself. He was wrong. I wasn't out of the woods yet. But now I had a map. And I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to make him watch it burn. Chapter 8. A Game of Mirrors. He thought he'd win by being first. But the truth doesn't have to shout. It just has to show up on time. Courtroom round 2. This time I walked in with evidence. Not a lawyer. Not a team. Just me. And a portable drive that held the receipts he never meant to leave behind. Troy was already there. Front row this time. Hair slicked back, suit sharper than before. He leaned over a laptop, flanked by a woman I assumed was his expert witness. The one he mentioned in the filing. A digital consultant. Hired to testify about metadata, anomalies in the documents he submitted. Anomalies he probably engineered. He saw me and smirked like we were keeping score. Like this was a game he still believed he was winning. I didn't look away. Instead, I approached the clerk, asked to submit a motion to stay judgment, and presented the external drive like a scalpel. I kept my voice level as I described what was on it. Video recordings of him modifying and exporting contracts with my identity. A drafted email with explicit admission of fraudulent use of my EIN. Session timestamps and screen reflections that placed him, visually and digitally, at the center of the fraud. The clerk asked if I had legal representation. "Not yet," I said. "But I have everything that matters." They took the drive. The judge reviewed the motion in silence. Troy's expert leaned over to whisper something. He nodded, but the color in his face shifted, just slightly. He knew. He knew the files were real. He knew what was coming. I didn't stay for the rest of the session. They postponed the ruling pending digital review, which meant I'd bought time. And leverage. But I still needed backup. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with every light off and typed the same phrase into every search bar I could think of. Digital identity theft attorney, tech fraud litigation. One name kept surfacing. Not on paid listings. Not in ads. In forum triats. In niche legal podcasts. In Reddit stories tagged #QuietKillers and #RealJustice. Maren Holt, former cybercrime prosecutor. Now solo. Specializes in digital entrapment, tech-based identity layering, and platform-enabled fraud. I emailed her with no expectations. Just a blunt subject line. He used my identity to build a business and sued me for it. Attached, a short summary, 2 screenshots, and 1 sample video. She replied at 6:04 a.m. "Don't send anything else electronically. We'll meet in person. Bring the original drive. This one's winnable." That was all. No hand-holding. No fluff. Just a woman who didn't need me to prove I was worth believing. I shut my laptop. Exhaled for the first time all week. Because I'd finally found someone who didn't just listen. She hunted. Chapter 9. Pattern recognition. He didn't just steal my identity. He built a business on it, and got lazy doing it. Maren didn't speak much at first. She just sat at my kitchen counter with her laptop open and her glasses pushed halfway down her nose, scrolling through the recovered files like she was reviewing the schematics of a trap she'd already disarmed a dozen times before. I tried not to hover, but I couldn't help watching her. The way her eyes moved, flicking from folder names to file properties to source code, as if the whole structure of what Troy had built was laid bare. After 20 minutes, she clicked her tongue once. "Found it." She turned the laptop toward me. 3 files side by side. All PDFs. All invoices submitted under Phase Frame Consulting. But each one had a different embedded author tag. 2 marked as created by Troy B., 1 by Elle Caldwell. Only I'd never touched those documents. She opened the metadata on the third one. He duplicated one of your old design templates. Overwrote the author ID, but didn't scrub the source path. "Look here," she pointed at a line of code. "This references a local username from his system. The username was tb_dev_admin. "Let me guess," she said dryly. "You don't go by TB?" I shook my head. She kept going. Every few minutes she muttered something, sloppy, amateur, no version control. Occasionally she paused to type something, capturing screenshots or highlighting discrepancies. And then she stopped cold. This is what's going to break him. She dragged a screen recording onto the desktop and hit play. Troy's voice filled the room, low and confident, narrating a screen share of a vendor onboarding process. In the corner of the screen, a paused Gmail draft with the subject line, "Let's control the story." The body read, "Using her credentials for consistency. Keeps the optics tight. Don't loop her in, she'll get confused." Marin rewound it twice, then zoomed in. In the monitor's reflection, faint but visible, was the outline of his face. "You don't get lucky with footage like this," she said, eyes still on the screen. "You get arrogant." She turned toward me for the first time in an hour. "You know what I love about guys like this? They don't just fabricate documents. They fabricate confidence. They think being early and loud is the same thing as being right." She closed the lid of the laptop gently. "We're going to flip his entire narrative." I sat back, exhaling. This is enough to win? It's enough to force him onto the defensive. And if we push the right way, we'll find out you're not the only one he did this to. She wasn't just guessing. She was building a pattern. Over the next 48 hours, Marin went to work like a quiet force of nature. She posted a discreet inquiry through a legal tech fraud channel she moderated, dropped an encrypted prompt into a whistleblower database, cross-referenced Troy's old usernames across developer forums, freelance boards, even a defunct consulting agency site with a client list that looked suspiciously inflated. 3 days later, we got the hit. A woman named Jordan. Former roommate. Former collaborator. Former casualty. "He took out a line of credit in my name," she wrote. "Said it was for a shared venture. Ghosted when I asked for repayment. Said I was trying to ruin him when I went to the bank." She attached screenshots. Shalug. An old notarized affidavit from a dispute she filed in Texas. The kind of thing that gets ignored when there's no digital proof to back it. But she still had the timeline, the receipts, the memory. Marin read the message in silence, then picked up her phone. "Let's talk to her," she said. That night, Jordan's voice came through clear on speaker. Even after everything, she sounded steady. Not emotional, just resolved. And when she finished, Marin said what I'd been thinking the entire time. "He's not just sloppy. Pause. He's serial." Chapter 10. The witness he didn't expect. The truth doesn't always kick down the door. Sometimes it walks in quietly, with documents. I don't think Troy expected to see me again. Not like this. He stood outside the courtroom doors in his polished blazer, phone in one hand, laughing at something his attorney whispered. It was the same smug energy he always carried, like none of this was serious. Like he'd already decided how the story would end. But the story wasn't his anymore. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I remembered. Not just temperature, the air itself felt tight, focused. And unlike the last time I sat at the plaintiff's table, I wasn't alone. Marin Holt walked in beside me, heels sharp against the tile, briefcase in hand. She didn't make a show of anything, no dramatic pause, no intimidation tactics. Just calm, controlled presence, like a woman used to walking into rooms where people lie for a living. The judge entered. "All rise," the bailiff said, and the quiet shuffle of suits followed. We sat. Troy glanced over. His smirk flickered when he saw Marin. I caught the moment his brow twitched, recognition mixed with uncertainty. He hadn't planned for her. That was his first mistake. The hearing opened with procedural motions, but Marin stood when it mattered. "Your Honor," she began, voice crisp but warm. "We're submitting a motion to admit new evidence, as well as a request to introduce a corroborating witness based on recent discoveries directly tied to the defendant's conduct." Troy's lawyer stood immediately. "Objection. The witness in question was not previously disclosed and doesn't meet the timeline for inclusion under pretrial rules." Marin didn't flinch. She stepped forward smoothly. "The defense's own digital trail is what brought this witness forward. The behavioral pattern is consistent, the timeline relevant. We're not opening a new case. We're confirming a deeper one." The judge leaned back slightly, considering. "Who is the witness?" Marin motioned to the back bench. "Jordan Turner, Your Honor. Former associate of the defendant. She has first-hand experience with nearly identical conduct. Identity misuse, falsified accounts, and reputational damage as a result of similar manipulation tactics." The judge glanced toward Jordan, who stood quietly as every eye turned to her. She looked unshakable. Hair pulled back, black dress simple and precise, no jewelry, no flash. Just clarity. She wasn't there to accuse. She was there to testify. The judge nodded. She'll be allowed. Let's proceed. Troy's smile disappeared completely. Jordan walked to the stand, calm as a surgeon. Sworn in. Seated. Ready. Marin approached the bench. Ms. Turner, how do you know Mr. Blake? I was his roommate for 6 months. We also collaborated on some tech and freelance projects. During that time, were your personal or financial details ever used in connection with those projects, with or without your knowledge? Jordan nodded. Yes. I discovered he opened a line of credit in my name. Said it was for a business venture we were supposedly building together. I hadn't agreed to that, and I never saw any paperwork. What happened when you confronted him? He called me erratic, told others I was unstable. He claimed I was trying to sabotage his business after a bad breakup. Marin paused. Was there a romantic relationship between you and Mr. Blake? No, Jordan said flatly. We were never involved. And what evidence do you have of this incident? Jordan reached into her file. Email chains, screenshots of conversations, copies of the credit application, and a statement I submitted to the bank at the time. I couldn't get legal traction back then. I didn't have anyone to help me prove it. But I never forgot it. Marin accepted the documents from the bailiff and handed them to the judge. Your Honor, these documents support the pattern of behavior already presented in our case. They show the defendant using access to a woman's personal and financial identity for personal gain, then gaslighting her when she pushed back. The judge scanned the first few pages, frowning slightly. Troy's attorney stood. Your Honor, this is highly prejudicial. These events are unrelated and occurred nearly 6 years ago. We moved to strike the testimony and evidence. Marin turned, folding her arms lightly. Then we'd like to subpoena Mr. Blake's vendor login history, PayPal activity, and hosting platform access logs. We believe you'll find that the same IP address used to create Ms. Turner's accounts also administered those used against my client, Ms. Caldwell. The judge looked up sharply. Are you prepared to file that request formally? We are. Troy's mouth opened slightly, just long enough to realize he had nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. Jordan looked over at me once, just briefly. Not to gloat, just to connect. She said the final line clearly, without emotion. I didn't come to ruin him. I came to confirm she's telling the truth. And for a long beat, the courtroom was still. No movement. No objections. Just the weight of what had finally landed. The judge spoke slowly, deliberately. The motion to admit the witness stands. The defense may respond after review of these materials. Troy sat back, face pale. His attorney didn't whisper this time. He just scribbled something on a notepad and slid it across the table. I couldn't see what it said, but I could guess the gist. This isn't going away. Not this time. And not with Marin sitting beside me. Chapter 11, Control-Alt-Delete. He ran his scheme like code, but he forgot what happens when you trace the commands. Back at Marin's office, the tone was different. This wasn't adrenaline anymore. This was calibration. Precision. After Jordan's testimony, the courtroom's momentum had shifted, but we both knew it wasn't enough to win. Not yet. Marin poured 2 cups of coffee and handed me one like we were about to review a marketing proposal. But what she slid across the desk was a printed list of Troy's server interactions. Let's talk breadcrumbs, she said. I leaned in. At the top of the page, timestamps from Troy's web hosting platform, DNS logins, and vendor submission portals. All tied to the consulting shell company he'd registered under my name. Each one of these entries shows him logging in as you, Marin explained, submitting forms, approving transactions. But the IPs don't match your location data. She flipped to a second page. And then there's this, he used an email verification loop tied to your name, but the recovery contact points back to his personal domain. I blinked. He used my alias to sign off on deals? She nodded. It gets better. The system he used for billing, the contract manager? We pulled the admin history. He wiped it clean 3 days before he filed that initial claim against you. Cleaned it how? Factory reset. Wiped directory. But he missed the mirror sync. Marin grinned. The kind of grin you see on someone who loves when someone else thinks they're too smart to get caught. She tapped her laptop and brought up a folder labeled /recovered_archive/temp_root. It opened like a timeline, emails, document versions, invoice templates. All with metadata linking directly to Troy. Author tags. Krishishon logs. Even shortcut keys that matched his usual input behavior. A digital fingerprint no amateur scrub job could hide. Once the court approves the subpoena request, she said, we hand this over. He can't say someone else did it. He is the someone else. I stared at the screen. My name had been stamped across files, deals, even emails I'd never written. I saw one marked client strategy call, LC, PDF, and had to close my eyes for a second. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I finally understood just how far he'd gone. I was a ghost in his system, I said quietly. No, Marin replied. You were the mask. There was a knock on the door. Her paralegal entered, holding a document. The judge just approved the full metadata subpoena. Marin took it, scanned the signature, and handed it to me like it was a victory flag. Congratulations, she said softly. You're about to crash his whole operating system. I exhaled slowly. The damage he'd done wasn't gone. But now, finally, it had a name, a shape, and soon consequences. We weren't just dragging his lies into the light. We were documenting every single line of code he'd written in the dark. Chapter 12, Echo Statement. He wrote my name into every file. Now the court gets to read it back to him, line by line. By the time I walked into the courtroom, the energy had shifted. Not just for me, for everyone. There were more people in the gallery than I expected. Not reporters, but other plaintiffs waiting for their hearings, attorneys flipping through notes, even a few admin staff from the courthouse who'd quietly taken seats. People wanted to see what this was. How a case that had started as unconfirmed financial dispute now had its own evidence cart. Troy sat across from me, jaw tight, fingers twitching against the manila folder in front of him. His posture had changed. Not cocky, not bored, just braced. Marin adjusted her blazer beside me and leaned in. Today's about tone, she whispered. Let the evidence speak. Then we make sure the court knows exactly who it was speaking about. The judge entered. The clerk called the case. And it began. The first exhibit was the hosting platform login history. Submitted as Exhibit 27, Marin said. Full metadata trail recovered from cloud backup. The clerk handed printed versions to the judge and opposing counsel. The courtroom screens lit up with timestamps, IP locations, and browser fingerprints. Each entry showed Troy accessing backend systems, using admin-level permissions, while logged in under the alias E. Caldwell. The judge didn't speak, just flipped each page slowly, pen tapping lightly against the table. Then came the second wave, the cleaned contract platform. Marin projected a side-by-side comparison of the scrubbed directory and the mirrored archive recovered by our forensic contact. The file names alone told the story. Client_pitch_ECL_final2.docs. Wireauth_ECL_sign. PDF. Internal_narrative_prep_ECL. Draft. And then the audio. Marin didn't even introduce it dramatically. She just pressed play. No, it's under Elle's name for now. That keeps it clean. Just make sure the backend doesn't trigger her notifications. Laughter. Casual. Controlled. I'll handle her if she starts asking questions. The room froze. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until Marin paused the clip and looked up. Submitted as Exhibit 34, Your Honor. Audio recovered from the defendant's Project Sync folder. Timestamped and geotagged. The voice on the file has been verified through a third-party match to Mr. Blake's registered voicemail. Troy's attorney finally stood. Your Honor, we object to the inclusion of private communications without proper consent. The judge held up a hand. I've reviewed the authentication notes. This file was stored on a shared project account administered under false credentials. The objection is overruled. He turned his eyes on Troy. Do you have a response to this evidence? Troy stood. Slowly. He gripped the back of his chair like it might steady him. I didn't intend for any harm to come from the setup, he said. At the time, I thought using Elle's name would help streamline some things. She was busy. I figured. Did you inform her? The judge asked. Did she consent to her name being used to create business accounts? Troy hesitated. Not directly, no. Marin stood, cutting in smoothly. Your Honor, we move for a formal ruling on full identity misappropriation and fraudulent intent, pursuant to Civil Code 52.1. The judge nodded once. Granted. A beat of silence. And then the judge turned to me. Ms. Caldwell, would you like to make a statement before I issue final directives? I stood. I didn't look at Troy, not right away. I looked at the judge, then the clerk, then the rows of quiet faces in the back. Only then did I turn. I lost weeks of my life trying to prove I wasn't the liar he made me out to be. Every time I opened an inbox, I was afraid I'd find something else with my name attached to someone else's mistake. Clients dropped me. I missed contract windows. My reputation took hits I couldn't defend because I didn't even know what I was being accused of. I took a breath. I didn't just lose income. I lost certainty of who I was in other people's eyes. I looked at Troy directly now. You wanted to build something and used me as the scaffolding. But when it collapsed, you blamed the frame. Marin didn't smile. But I saw the corner of her pen pause, like a quiet note had landed. The judge folded his hands. Effective immediately, he said. All claims filed by the defendant are dismissed. Full restoration of the plaintiff's legal and financial record is to be initiated within 7 business days. An additional hearing regarding restitution and potential criminal referral will be scheduled. This court finds credible evidence of sustained identity misuse for material gain. He looked at Troy. And Mr. Blake, you are advised to secure representation for the proceedings ahead. The gavel didn't slam. It clicked once. Quiet. Final. Troy didn't speak. He just sat down slowly, face blank, folder unopened. And I walked out of that courtroom knowing what came next. Not relief. Not revenge. Control. And the power to finish this on my terms. Chapter 13, Legacy Wipe. He built a whole empire in my shadow. But shadows don't survive daylight. The courthouse steps were colder than I expected. Not the weather, the mood. People moved past like everything was normal. Like someone hadn't just had their entire playbook dismantled upstairs. Marin stepped beside me and offered a faint smile. You did good, she said. That last statement? That'll echo. I nodded, but I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Troy had spent months erasing my credibility, building his fake empire off the back of my name. Just because the court saw the truth now didn't mean I could flip a switch and forget the wreckage. But I'd started, and that mattered. Later that week, I sat in front of my laptop, staring at the full forensic report Marin had sent. Every digital move Troy made had been logged, mirrored, and backed up to a folder titled Legacy Wipe_Final. It was poetic. One click, and his history of manipulation became the evidence of his unraveling. But what surprised me wasn't what was in the report. It was what wasn't. There were no apologies. No last-minute emails begging for forgiveness. No messages saying, I messed up. Just a paper trail of convenience, control, and cowardice. And I realized something. People like Troy don't want forgiveness. They want credit for what they built, even if it was stolen. That's why the final reckoning couldn't be in a courtroom. It had to be in the places he used to dominate. The platforms. The clients. The communities. Over the next few weeks, Marin helped me draft a series of legal notifications. Cease and desists. Rights reclamation. Fraud alerts submitted to every financial agency tied to his schemes. And then I made the choice to do something else. I told my story. Not the whole courtroom saga. Just enough to show other freelancers, other creators, that it could happen. That identity theft wasn't always some stranger in another country. Sometimes it was a colleague who shook your hand, borrowed your charger, and smiled like he already owned your signature. The post went viral within 48 hours. Not because it was scandalous, but because people recognized it. The manipulation. The misuse. The tone. The fallout was fast. Platforms dropped him. Contracts vanished. Old collaborators quietly removed his name from shared work. Troy tried to respond. A blog post. A short video. A half-baked press release. But no one was listening anymore. His voice didn't hold weight without someone else's name attached to it. And that's when I finally felt it. Not just freedom. Closure. Not the perfect kind. Not the movie-ending kind. But the kind that lets you wake up, open your laptop, and see your own name. Untouched, unspoiled, finally your own again. And that was the ending he never saw coming.
Thanks so much for watching. If you love a good revenge story, or if you've ever dreamed of getting the last word without saying much at all, you're in the right place. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new savage ending. Because around here, karma always hits different.